Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Commish Orr, and welcome back to something I like to call Stories from the Maelstrom, a recap of the day's games for this past week of real time. First, we head to Oakland as the New York Swats come to face the Oakland Jacks. They faced off in New York the prior two games, I believe. This is the first game first game of a two-game series in Oakland. As you can tell from the title there, Dickey's doubles sink the Swats. So if we look at the score sheet, we can see that Hal Newhouser for the Swats was facing off against Whitey Ford. And really, it all came down to a bad second inning for Newhouser. The Jacks batted around in that inning. He walked the first two batters, Robin Yount and Joe Gordon. Goose Goslin followed that with a double. And then Bill Dickey had the first double of the game there, drove in 2 runs. Overall, they would score 5. The Oakland Jacks would score 5 in the second inning, and that was really all they would end up needing. They did score another run in the third, thanks to the second Bill Dickey double of the game, driving in Goose Goslin. So that was his third RBI and second double of the game. He would also double in the sixth. So overall, he was 3 for 4 with 3 doubles. Drove in 3 runs, scored twice, and improved his average to 353 in this game. After this game, New York really couldn't quite get things together against Whitey Ford. Whitey Ford may not have had the sharpest game, but he did limit them to 5 hits over the 7 innings he pitched, and walked 1. Most of that damage came in the 6th inning against him, when New York. Jim Rice drove in, had an RBI single, and Ken Griffey Jr. followed that with a 2-run homer. It was his 8th of the season, which I think puts him tied for the lead in home runs. Jim Cott came in to pitch the 8th, and some of the 9th, and allowed 1 run in the 9th with 2 outs. When the New York Swats put together 3 straight singles. The last of those singles came against Mariano Rivera to drive in a run there in the 9th. But the loss goes to Hal Newhouser, who's 2-2 now. Whitey Ford improves to 2-3. His ERA is still not very good, 7.36 ERA, but Mariano Rivera gets his 4th save. New York improves to 9-14 with this game. Whereas New York fell to 9-14 with this game, while Oakland has improved to 11-11. And I believe, if we look, Oakland has now won 3 straight. So they beat New York in the first 2 games of the series in New York, and now they've won the first game in Oakland for their 3 straight wins to get back to 500. Next, we head over to Houston. The Astrodome, when the St. Louis Wizards came to town to play the Houston Hoots. And this game was crazy. It's a crazy, crazy game with a ton of offense and a lot of home runs hit in the Astrodome. Carl Hubble was taking the mound for the Wizards against Randy Johnson for the Hoots. And neither pitcher was very sharp. They ran into some trouble here or there. Randy Johnson actually started the game by striking out the side, which was interesting, but then he followed that with allowing some home runs. In the bottom of the first, though, the first home run hit was Mike Schmidt, who hit a 2-run homer against Carl Hubble. But then in the second, the Wizards responded with a couple of homers, one by Larry Walker and a 2-run homer by Orlando Cepeda there in the second inning. In the third, another homer was hit, this time by the Hoots. Hank Aaron had a 2-run shot. And that was enough to tie the game at 5-5. I should have mentioned that in the top of the third, Stan Musial had a home run, a 2-run shot of his own. So at that point, the game was 5-5 after 3 innings. Both starters were still in there. The Wizards did score another run in the fourth, but then things kind of calmed down, as much as you can say it calmed down, until the 6th, and that's when both starters would be pulled from the game. First, Randy Johnson allowed a leadoff home run, his second of the game, to Orlando Cepeda. who was 3 for 3 at that point. Randy Johnson was pulled for Hoyt Wilhelm, who was able to get through the rest of the 6th inning without allowing any more runs. But at that point, it was 7-5 Wizards. The Wizards, of course, with the top record in the Maelstrom, and Houston one of the worst. But so I think all expectations were that Wizards were going to cruise here with a 7-5 lead. But that wasn't to be the case, because in the bottom of the 6th, Roberto Clemente and Gary Carter led off with singles before Hubble struck out Duke Snyder. But then Archie Vaughn had a triple to score 2 runs. That was enough for the Wizards to pull Hubble for Warren Spahn. Sadly, Archie Vaughn would end up scoring 2, so by the end of that, Houston had retaken the lead 8-7 at that point, heading into the 7th inning. Hoyt Wilhelm still on the mound. He allowed a leadoff single to Larry Walker. Chipper Jones walked, and then Mike Piazza hit a 3-run homer in the 7th for the Wizards then to retake the lead 10-8 at that point. The Houston did not go quietly. They scored another run in the bottom of the 7th to make it 10-9. But then the Wizards responded with 2 more runs in the 8th inning against Burley Grimes. Houston brought in Burley Grimes, who allowed 2 more runs on a double from Chipper Jones. That put them up 12-9 at that point in the 8th. But in the bottom of the 8th inning, things fell apart for the Wizards. As you can see there, there was a leadoff home run to Jeff Bagwell. This was against Jesse Haynes. And then Jesse Haynes had 2 outs and a runner on first before allowing 2 straight singles. The last one to Gary Carter to score another run. He was pulled for Bruce Sutter, who was trying to keep that lead alive. 12 to 11, I want to say at that point. But Sutter ended up walking Duke Snyder, allowing a single to Archie Vaughn. So he walked Duke Snyder to load the bases. Archie Vaughn singled in an RBI. Bases were still loaded. And Ryan Sandberg, with the game tied 12-12, hit a grand slam to put Houston up 16-12 at that point. So Houston bats around in the 8th inning, scores 7 runs, 3 of those against the Wizards closer, Bruce Sutter, who had been pitching quite well this season, and puts them up 16-12. Lee Smith came in the 9th after Grimes got Andre Dawson to fly out, but then allowed 2 straight singles to Cepeda and Tony Gwynn, who was pinch hitting in the 9th. At that point, Lee Smith came in because there were visions that St. Louis might come back somehow to win this one. Lee Smith got Oscar Charleston line out. He walked Rogers Hornsby to make things very interesting, but then got Stan Musial to ground out to end the inning and end the game. Teams combined for 40 hits, 28 runs. Houston takes this one 16-12 and improves the 9-14. The Wizards fall to 18-5. They have lost 2 of their last 3 games against Houston, which is kind of surprising. But as you can see, there were a lot of home runs hit this game. A total of 9 homers, 4 hit by Houston and 5 hit by the Wizards. So pretty crazy stuff. Mike Piazza had a homer. Cepeda had 2 homers. Musial had a homer. Larry Walker had a homer. Jeff Bagwell, Ryan Sandberg, Mike Schmidt, Hank Aaron, all had homers. Crazy, crazy stuff. Heading over to the game between the Detroit Rockets and the Boston Splinters at Fenway Park, and this game got rained out. These two teams have been battling back and forth for first place. This is the second time that Boston has been involved in a rained out game that's gotten postponed. This game's been rescheduled for the April 26th here in a couple of days. The teams are scheduled to play again tomorrow. They had a day off, travel day the day after that, but they will now play the they'll make up this game on that day. Finally, we head to Los Angeles as the Chicago Docks face the Los Angeles Dynamos. And we had Greg Maddux facing off against Curt Schilling in this one. Curt Schilling taking the mound for the Docks. Greg Maddux has been pretty good with the Dynamos, even though his record's only 1-1 heading into this game. His ERA was pretty good. He had some struggles, actually, with his control, which is kind of surprising to say for Greg Maddux. But the first sign of that was when he hit Sammy Sosa to lead off the second inning. Sosa would later score on an RBI single from Troy Tulowitzki. So that was one of the first cases. And then there was a fifth inning where Maddux allowed a couple of runs. He had a leadoff triple from Troy Tulowitzki before he struck out Buster Posey. Jeff Kent had an RBI single. And then Maddux walked Todd Helton, allowed a single to Pete Rose to load the bases, and then walked in a run, walking Barry Bonds. So, again, Maddux, very rare. He hits one batter. He walks in a run. Overall, he only lasted 6 innings, allowed 5 runs on 9 hits. It's definitely one game he will not want to remember too much of. And those couple of runs here and there could have been the difference. The Chicago Docks did score another run in the 9th that was unearned. When Johnny Bench Todd Helton popped one up, and Johnny Bench lost it in the, I don't know if he lost it in the sun or what, but he'll have that ball to drop, and Helton would later score later in the inning. Sammy Sosa would drive him in with an RBI single. So if you remove those couple of runs, this game would have been very close. LA only scored 3 runs, so off of Curt Schilling. Schilling went 7 innings, allowed those 3 earned runs on 9 hits. So he didn't have the sharpest game, but it was good enough to win this one. Schilling improves to 3-1. Billy Wagner had his 7th save in this game. He pitched a scoreless 9th where he allowed a Joe Morgan leadoff single and then struck out Chuck Klein, Cristobal Torriente, and Eddie Matthews to end the game. Chicago improves to 8-15, and LA falls to 11-12 after this one. The main story out of Chicago, though, is a roster change. Now, earlier in the year, Chicago benefited from Albert Pujols retiring from Major League Baseball. As soon as Albert Pujols retired from Major League Baseball, he joined the team here in the Maelstrom. Remember, the Maelstrom is made up of players that are not active currently, and so the Chicago Docks are made up of players not in the Hall of Fame. And since Pujols had just retired, he's not yet in the Hall of Fame, he was able to join the Chicago Docks, who were hoping that would really give them a boost. Sadly, Pujols is only hitting 188 so far, so he hasn't really given them the boost that they were expecting. And then, with the announcement this week of Scott Rowland being inducted into the Hall of Fame, that made him ineligible to remain on the Chicago Docks. Chicago Docks is made up of non-Hall of Famers. And so Scott Rowland was forced to leave the team. Now, any of the other 3 teams in the National League could have picked Scott Rowland up. However, none of them chose to do so, considering their third baseman that they currently have. So what that means is Scott Rowland has seen the last of his days in the Maelstrom, unless something else strange happens. Overall, he batted .240 with a .367 on-base percentage. He was 12 for 50. He didn't hit any homers. He walked 8 times, struck out 17 times. He did steal a base. So overall, he was he was okay. He filled the gap. Remember, averages in the National League are a lot lower, so that 240 batting average isn't as terrible as one may think. But he really didn't have too much of a shot to show himself when Albert Pujols came in, since Pujols is pretty much an everyday starter at this point. But yeah, just an interesting thing to see. So if we if we go back to the other National League teams, if you're curious to see why none of the other teams picked him up, we can see, if we go to the Houston roster, that they have Mel Ott and Mike Schmidt at third base. So they weren't going to switch and bring in Roland to replace either of those guys. Los Angeles Dynamos, we look at their third baseman and we see Eddie Matthews and Tony Perez. Again, Scott Rowland and Tony Perez are actually pretty close, but it wasn't enough for LA to want to pick him up. And finally, the St. Louis Wizards. We look at their third baseman, Chipper Jones and Ron Santo. Again, Rowland was not enough of an upgrade to want them to bring him onto the team either. So unfortunately, congratulations go out to Scott Rowland for making the Hall of Fame, but sadly that means he's leaving the Maelstrom. If we go back to the home page and we take a look here, we see the standings. Oakland has won 3 straight, as I said, to prove to 11-11. They're only a game and a half out. Boston has a marginal lead there. Meanwhile, St. Louis still leading in the National League with an 18-5 record, though they've won 7 and lost 3 of their last 10 games. So maybe some chips in their armor starting to show. We are heading up to the All-Star break, so one thing to keep in mind is that the All-Star ballots are available. So if you'd like to vote for your All-Star starters for the Maelstrom, you can either click on the link to this story and then click on this Google form down here. That will take you to the ballot. I'll also leave a direct link to the ballot down in the description. There are probably a few real weeks left before we reach the All-Star break, and that game I plan to play out and have uploaded for everybody to view that. I'm not sure if it'll be live or whether it'll just be an upload of the game after it's played. I'm also doing a home run derby, but this is your chance to vote for starters. So whoever gets the votes will be the starting 9 batters for the American and National League teams. I'll choose the reserves and the pitchers. And it should be pretty interesting because in the Maelstrom, there's been no interleague play, so it'll be the first time that the American League and National League will kind of get a chance to face off prior to the World Series at the end of the season. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you found this to be interesting. If you like these kind of videos, click the like button. Let me know down in the comments. And until next time, have a great evening.